So, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Shall we start? We don't have a lot of time, so I'm honored to be able to moderate this panel on shaping newly skilled managers in the digital revolution. I think it's a very important topic for the next generation and also quite controversial. I think, as the host said, we have a fantastic selection of panelists, and I love the fact that we're representing different parts of the world as well. So welcome to Dean Boehm from IE Business School, Dean Okonedo from Lagos Business School, Dean Kang from Asian Institute of Management, and Dean Veloso from Imperial College Business School. I think I'd like to start not by looking in the future, but talking about today. So for those of you who know, QS is responsible for producing the QS World University Rankings. As part of our methodology, we survey over 70,000 employers around the world every year. And for many years, we've been actually tracking employer attitudes to skills. And we've just produced a white paper on the global graduate skills gap. And in many respects, it's quite challenging because employers everywhere in the world are saying, actually, there's a really big skills gap. You know, what we want from our graduates compared to what is being delivered is significant. And in particular, and it's well reported, areas like of soft skills, team playing, communication skills, but also problem solving is being identified. And the biggest gap at present, not in all regions, but overall, is resilience. So I'm interested, in your regions of the world, do you recognize these skills gaps? And what are your institutions doing to tackle them? And maybe we start with Dean Okonedo from Lagos Business School.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. We do have those problems in my region. 10 years ago, when we sought employers' views across Africa on what skills they most require in MBA students, there were three things that were top. Problem solving, adaptability, as well as creative thinking. 10 years down the line, those still remain the top things that employers are looking for. But then, now, last year, the survey that we did included one more thing, which was cultural awareness as well as emotional intelligence. Yeah. Now, increasingly, that seems to be something that employers are seeking. I believe that that comes because of the interconnectedness between businesses across the world, and then the fact that with African graduates, they're going to be working in global organizations, and therefore, they have to be nuanced in cultural awareness. Now, with that in mind, it's been pretty challenging for us, trying to see the ways by which we can inculcate those skills. At my institution, for a long time, we've always had a course that's called Analysis of Business Problems that focuses on how they can face the challenges that occur. As you know, business education is contextual, and therefore, when we take global problems, usually the solutions that can be pursued in the Western or developed worlds may not ordinarily work there, which is where the adaptability as well as the creativity as how to take those solutions and then put it in the local context to see what do we do in that regard. Over the last few years, though, we have started to look at more experiential learning, bringing those into classroom, immersing students in real-life businesses, and that comes through things like internship programs as well as project programs across Africa as well, which is putting them there and then faced with the challenges of the environment, the instability in policies and things like that. How do you thrive, and then how do you operate? So now that's something new that we have started to do over the last 3 years as well. Last year, we only just started to include something on the course of analysis of business on judgment and decision making, because increasingly when we look at the forces that are shaping the world of business today, all the discussions that we've held about artificial intelligence as well as robotics, I think that the critical skills, in my view, that are needed is really how do managers make sense with this. And therefore, the judgment in decision making, which takes into consideration the behavioral aspects of things, comes into consideration.
Great, thank you. And they say necessity is the mother of invention. We see a lot of innovation coming out of Africa, driven by sort of limited resources. So, yes. Dean Kang.
I think there's no doubt that we're seeing lots and lots of changes, but when I read the report that is being mentioned, as well as many other reports, what strikes me all the time is nobody's talking about lack of marketing knowledge. I happen to be a marketing professor, or even financial management. Of all the pages in their report, there's only one place, it's China, which talk about technical skills. And most of these we can widely call them soft skills, or the skills that none of us as a professors, as a PhD graduates, actually learned when I was being trained, when we were being trained. We're talking about the kind of skills that are not necessarily core strengths of especially research faculty. And yes, resilience is one of the gaps that have been identified. I mean, how do we teach resilience? I think what I see, especially in where I am right now, in part of Asia, Southeast Asia in particular, I think the family sizes are getting smaller. Economic development is rapidly happening. And we all know the differences with the millennials, and they want quick fixes. They want things to happen very, very rapidly without having a lot of patience, if you will, but still want to make an impact. And how do we actually teach? Not just what we teach is an issue, it's actually how do we teach what we teach at business schools and across the university that will be able to make an impact with a totally different kind of audience who have grown up with a totally different kind of environment. And I think it is a challenge that all of us face, because unless we radically rethink, because if you think about what's happening in the real world, whether it's industry, whether it's a policy level decisions, economic development, enormous development changes happen. But if you look at how we teach in the business school, whether it's an MBA program or undergraduate program, whether it's 30 years ago or 50 years ago, more or less is the same, more or less is in a similar way delivered. So I think it challenges all of us in education to take a step back and not only think about what subject we teach and how do we incorporate that into some of the things that we have always taught and taught very well, but what would be the fundamental differences that we want to think about, and whether that's disrupting our own ways of doing things, or learning from other schools and other places, or even other industries who are doing very well. But I think we have a huge challenge ahead of us.
Yep, and we'll come back to how you deliver to the millennials later, actually. So thank you. Dean Veloso.
Well, thank you for the invitation to be here. I mean, this is certainly, a set of challenges that we have very present at the Business School of Imperial College. But we're also very fortunate to be part of this amazing technical institution that is Imperial College. And one of the things that we've been trying to do is to precisely reflect on what can we do to create an environment for learning at the business school that leverages the immense potential and capabilities that we have at Imperial, and that helps tackle some of these challenges, right? So complex problem solving, teamwork, and communication, and trying to innovate around that and try different things. And the general evolution has been to try to create new learning environments that surprises either the students but also executives. We try to do a variety of these initiatives on some of our executive offerings, in particular bringing data, decisions, challenging environments to come to bear. So let me give you a couple of examples of what that means. That means, for example, that we have, as part of Imperial, a data visualization room that is basically a 320 degrees floor to bottom to ceiling visualization room. So one of the things that we do, for example, with some students and some executives is to prepare problems where they're thrown a bunch of data that they have to analyze, but they also have to find novel ways to visualize that data in a completely new environment, which is this visualization room. The nice thing about that is that even if you've done analysis for a long time, either a consultancy or in whatever firm, it creates a new environment. And so having to work through in the team to explore that brings out this complex problem solving, this capability to adapt to a new environment and to do things differently. Another example is to take executives to a carbon capture sequestration lab. So we have basically a mini lab for carbon capture sequestration that's part of our chemical engineering department. But what we do is we partner with the chemical engineering to create an environment by which we put managers to understand about risk and decision making in teams under adversarial environments in this carbon capture and sequestration lab. Why? Because we emulate basically a leak in the lab, and they have to learn very quickly what they need to do, how to respond to that, and to do that as part of a team, right? I mean, these are not people that are used to work in chemical engineering labs, but that is part of that learning environment of giving them minimum information, putting them as a team, and working through that. And it's the whole structuring on how you go about this learning environment that helps develop this complex solving making. And the third example that I will give, that we're trying to do, is to bring design thinking much more into the way that we do education, be it at the graduate level, but also on the executive education space. And why? Because digital transformation is a lot about rethinking how you create value. And one of the things that we want, and this connects to the resilient element that you mentioned earlier on, and that you also has been alluded to, is that we need to make sure that students and executives don't paralyze in an environment where somebody says that, well, the way we create value is now no longer works because the startup has just disrupted that or changing. And we see, for example, the whole design thinking approach is very valuable to create a toolkit so that a graduate, when he's in a company environment, be it a startup or an existing firm, and is faced with a situation like that, he or she has a toolkit by which they can go through this process and try to address and try to solve that as part of a team, right? So these are three examples of how you can bring this, very significant gap in capabilities, but try to create novel learning environments within a school that leverages the particular environment that we have at Imperial College to try to develop these skills in graduates, in executives, and more broadly across the community.
That's great, and a fascinating example of interdisciplinary learning. I think many people would agree that derivatives are probably as toxic as any deadly chemical, so teaching managers risk.
Exactly, that's a very good analogy.
That is interesting. Martin?
So let me try to complement a little bit what my colleagues already said, and obviously I completely agree with everything. First of all, I'm answering a question. I think clearly resilience is one of the key skills, key attitudes, I think, that employers are looking for. Completely agree. Some of the other attitudes that you mentioned, capabilities such as problem solving, working in teams, communication skills, and so forth, I think this is clearly what we see as well in our part of the world. That obviously has certain implications, I think, on what we teach, how we teach, and where we teach, and my colleagues already touched a bit on this. So in terms of what we clearly have to start focusing much more on moving away from trying to just educate them or diffuse or knowledge to developing skills in our students. But obviously we also have to rethink as well the methodologies, the pedagogies that we're using. And finally, obviously as well, where do we actually teach? And here I want to make a little bit the case for not only learning inside of the classroom, but obviously as well, considering the opportunity of finding learning experiences that take place outside of the classroom. The usual suspect would be that obviously when I go through an undergraduate education, not talking about postgraduate, undergraduate education, probably my extracurricular experience is an unbelievably valuable experience in order to be exposed to a multicultural environment, learn this cultural understanding. It might be as well just socializing, communicating, being part of the debating club on having to argue my case, but at the same time taking in the arguments of some of my opponents. But obviously you can think about more structured learning interventions as well that take students outside of the comfort zone, that take them even outside of the classroom. Let me give you one example that we do, because we obviously probably want to touch on a couple of other questions as well. And it's maybe a silly example. What we actually teach our students is how to cook a paella. Obviously what we're trying to do is, similar as Imperial College, leveraging the technology background of the institution. We are in an amazing country where the culinary adventures are amazing, right? So, and one of them is clearly paella. But I think it's a fantastic opportunity for the students to first of all get out of the classroom, to do a paella or cook the paella in a team, which requires communication, teamwork, coordination. It typically puts them in a situation that they've never been in before. They never for sure cooked a paella, or at least in most of the cases, and many of them have never even stood in the kitchen or have any experience in cooking. And finally, I think it teaches something that is the perfect link to what you mentioned about resilience. Because for me, resilience has to do with ambition, but has to do as well with the stamina of standing up again. So it's about failing, failing, and failing over and over again. So the good thing is as well about this paella cooking is, as you have probably never done it before, and it's a little bit chaotic, and you have to do it under time pressure, that you're probably going to fail. So it's not going to be the best world-class paella, right? But it's a great thing, because you learn how to fail, and you learn from this failure, and you learn how to deal with this kind of failure.
Does the professor have to eat the paella to score the class?
That's
So
the grading.
at the end, we have an evaluation process by the jury. Is good for me that I had never to be involved in that. So that's a good thing. Cool.
I mean, experiential learning is something that came out from the speakers earlier today, and I think comes across here as well. It seems to be a big theme. So my next question is, what is the digital revolution, and what does that mean in terms of the new skills that are going to be required? And Dean Okonedo, do you want to start?
Yeah. When we talk about digital revolution, I guess in my part of the world, it's something that we have experienced a lot. In the past, we used to be adapters of innovation. So with something that was developed in the Western world, we will bring it to Africa and then see how we're going to adapt it to the circumstances. But over the last few years, I think that with the increasing knowledge and technological advances, we become innovators. So, things like mobile money, which is alien, in the developed world there, because there's more financial inclusion in the developed world. Such things were innovations that came out of Africa in terms of telemedicine and things like that. So we see a revolution across most of Africa that's brought on by technology, and is what I would call the digital revolution, not really a transformation, especially in places like East Africa and across many parts of Africa as well. And then we've also seen disruptors, that technological companies are causing in various industries, including in education. And also in my part of the world, where we were very much based on the traditional schools and the traditional methods of learning, which is the brick and mortar. Now, if we want to think about educating the workforce across the continent, we have to think about the ways by which we can use technology as well as mobile telephony in order to reach those as well. So it's really a revolution. Now, with the students that we're educating, a lot comes into play. First of all, what sometimes is taken for granted in many parts of the world is still the literacy level, which we contend with across Africa as well, which is critical for how you make use of the technology that's needed for you to learn. So at once we see the potential, but also there are the challenges of increasing the literacy levels in order that people can take advantage of that. So that's the first problem as well. But increasingly, with the graduates or the people we're trying to develop at the business school, we have to look at the world today, we face all those things that are shaping the world of business, but I think the future is uncertain, it's undefined, and yet unknown. And therefore, what is more important is, in the face of these rapid changes in technology, how do we prepare the people that are coming to the business school in order to learn not only how to take advantage, to understand and how to change rapidly in this regard. That's something that we grapple with, I must admit, because we're trying to inculcate in them the ability to question, the ability to make judgments as well, the ability to change in the face of all those things that are changing, but also the ability to manage people whose jobs will be lost as a result of the technological innovation as well. So that human element is something that increasingly we have to give consideration to. And that leads to a focus on what are the softer skills there. So these things like emotional intelligence, they come into play as well. The communication, they come into play. The teamwork, they come into play as well. So it's a combination of factors that we're bringing in now.
Yeah, and you talk about the ability to change, and in the Graduate Skills Gap report, we actually saw for the first time that problem solving was the most important skill for employers. What's the situation in Asia? What do you think are going to be the future skills in Asia? And why do you think problem solving is emerging as like the most important skill for employers?
I think we do have perhaps slightly different challenges compared to most developed countries. I think for us, nation building is a very important agenda for not only our students and faculty and researchers, but also corporations and of course government. It is also the issue of inclusive growth. So we decided digital transformation means that we have to transform ourselves. It is probably same at IE and my colleagues' respective institutions as well. It is one of the most frequently asked topics that we cover for corporate clients as well as the government. But we realize that we really need to practice what we preach first. So when we decide to offer Master of Science in Data Science program, and started looking for faculty. This was the first data science program in the Philippines and one of the first in the region. We realized this is not the core capabilities of business school faculty. So we ended up hiring physicists, mathematicians, as well as people coming from a very science and engineering background rather than traditional social science background. But we had to find people who can actually engage in tripartite conversation, meaning businesses, corporations, government, as well as academia. And we were able to get the donation of a fastest supercomputer. We were able to have a very successful, the first cohort intake, recruitment. But all of these meant that our traditional business school side of our faculty started thinking about how do we actually do things differently? How do we actually transform ourselves? Dealing with the traditional MBA classes and MBA courses and MBA students' mindset. Data visualization is one way, but I think this whole issue of complex problem solving, whole issue of artificial intelligence, the role of machine learning in day-to-day decision making, are we actually educating people only to become redundated because AI will replace the human power in so many areas, especially in areas like accounting. There are a lot of very strong predictions. So I think for me and for us, digital transformation is not just technological changes or even software development. It really is much more comprehensive in terms of change in the mindset, change in terms of willingness to disrupt the way we do things, the way we think about education, the way we think about business school education in general.
Yep. And you've touched upon my next question, which I'll direct to Martin first, which is, given these changing skill requirements, and we've kind of talked about big data and how that's impacting, what do you think are going to be the courses most in demand in the future? How is that demand profile going to change, both from a student perspective and an employer perspective?
So I think Nunzio, as you said, I think it's a perfect segue into this question, what Jikyeong just mentioned as well. Because I think, just highlighting this a little bit, I think we're going to have clearly three different components, let's say, right? One component is clearly we have to develop in our students this digital literacy. That's going to be absolutely important. They have to understand technology, have to be able to deal with technology. That's absolutely key. What some of the earlier speakers today mentioned as well, the so-called human skills, what makes us truly distinct, what gives us maybe an advantage over machines, or at least complements what machines are doing well, which is, for instance, empathy, innovation, creativity, communication skills, and so forth, right? So that is clearly, for me, the second block. And to link this back to your initial question about problem solving, which has different names to it. It could be called problem solving, it could be critical thinking. I think this is really the key asset. This is really the key skill if we think about it. And obviously we probably need as well courses in that respect, or at least have to think of pedagogies to develop this particular skill. Why is it so important? And let me give you one example from one of our alumni. One of our alumni has just recently been promoted to the position of the chief scientist, or chief decision-making officer, right, for a large multinational insurance company. And actually he mentioned in a conversation that he went to his CEO and said, I think you're mistaken, because I'm not a techie. I don't have a computer systems or information systems degree. I don't really understand this. I don't program. And the CEO responded and he said, no, you're absolutely right. You are the guy we chose for that position for one particular reason. Because we don't need a techie to lead the big data unit. We need someone who actually asks the right question. Yes, all these techies, all these statisticians, information systems guys, the programmers, they're going to help us to find in the vast amount of data the answer to the questions that we're raising. But that's not going to help us to disrupt this industry. This is not going to help us to develop a competitive or maintain, for that matter of fact, a competitive advantage. But the questions that we're asking, this is going to help us to develop the new competitive advantage and set us up for the future. So the CEO said, you are the right guy because you have to ask the right question. So if you ask me what would be the number one skill, what would be the number one course, I think it is injecting the humanities into our degree programs, into the technical degrees, into the business degrees, in order to teach our students how to think holistically, how to see reality through different lenses.
Very interesting.
Can I just interject there one thing? I mentioned that we studied the first data science program. Half of our students are funded by corporates. And the reason that happened was exactly what the CEO said, because we said, we're not going to teach you how to code, we'll teach you how to ask the right questions. So when we were actually approaching some of the potential sponsors, I said, we will teach all the technical skills, but these are the commanders of the industry who will be able to ask the right questions, have a conversation with the CEOs. And I think it's really important, and it goes back to the subject of how do we look at interdisciplinary issues? Because I'm sure Enase and Martin, you will remember when we were getting PhDs, interdisciplinary research was really looked down. We were taught to be focused, very narrowly focused. But I think what's happening in the world right now is demanding that we actually think together in terms of how we problem solve, rather than just having a very narrow focus.
A resurgence of the humanities.
Exactly.
Cool. But the other thing you touched upon is interdisciplinary, and for Imperial, you've got a history of interdisciplinary teaching. What do you predict will be the sort of courses of the future?
I think more of that. I mean, I think we see a demand on both sides. We see a lot more demand on the technical skills, on new sets of technical skills. So, how do people that do programming on the finance side, for example, the fintech, which is a very strong area for Imperial, is a very significant growth area on the demand across the board. I mean, certainly on specialized programs in finance, but also our MBAs are interested in these kinds of things and understanding more analytics, big data. So all that is growing, but the rest is also growing. Sense making out of data. How do you make sense? How do you understand that data? How do you push that on an entrepreneurial element? How do you connect that back to the design thinking that I was talking about? But the other element that for us has been quite important in terms of this digital transformation is really to say that, and it relates to a comment that was made earlier on, which is it's hard to preach if you don't practice. So one of the things that we did at Imperial 5-6 years ago is a very significant commitment to digital education, right? So we created an EdTech lab, and we've really pushed forward and been pushing forward on those capabilities on that space. So that has meant that we launched a global online MBA that is basically all digital. Our executive MBA is blended. We flipped our masters in management. We have a variety of mix of digital and face-to-face that happens in the school in important ways. And we feel that that's quite important to be able to understand what it is to be in a very digital environment, in a very significant, at a very significant level, and not just on traditional degrees, but also, for example, we launched a business analytics online. How do you teach these things, in a digital way? Is a different set of challenges that forces us to push ourselves onto that, and even pushing ourselves in a different directions. For example, we're now doing machine learning over the data that we have on the students that do our global online MBA to identify patterns of learning. So those that cram everything into just a short time versus those that pace things over time, does it make a difference from the point of view of learning? Can you identify patterns earlier on and intervene over that? These are all very interesting things that are also very much part of the way that we have to think about our role and about our role in terms of a digital world and digital education. There is an important part of what we do in a significant way.
Thank you. So, digital learning, data analysis, key themes, but also the rise of humanities is an interesting intercept, which it'll be interesting how that plays out. The next question is connected, but actually this morning we heard a lot about artificial intelligence, and the futurist was saying that it's going to change everything. There's a danger of artificial general intelligence that could be really threatening. How's it going to impact on your education institutions, but more importantly, does it change the nature of the people you should be developing? Because the question that we're answering is newly skilled managers. And I would suggest we should be looking at creating a new breed. And should it be a creative? Should it be will everyone become entrepreneurs? Do we want different kind of leadership skills? I mean, Martin, do you want to start?
So I think artificial intelligence is going to have we focused always the entire time about what should we be teaching differently as a response to this digital revolution, but at the same time I think we should become part as well of this digital revolution. And I think here AI above everything has a fantastic or provides a fantastic opportunity. Francisco already mentioned a little bit, you start collecting more and more data, and that data can obviously be used to feed artificial intelligence in order to find the right learning path, for instance. I completely agree as well that artificial intelligence should be used by educational institutions in order to make the learning much more personalized, much more customized towards the specific needs of our students. This is nothing new. We already know for centuries, essentially, that what we should be doing is we should be adapting our teaching according to the learning styles, according to the preferences, but more importantly as well, according to the previous level of knowledge that our students already have. Very often, we are not able to do that right now inside the classroom because we are talking maybe to 50, 100, or sometimes even 500 students at the same time, and we can't take into consideration these different levels of expertise. But the great thing is technology allows us to do that, allows us to customize, to personalize, but at the same time, AI will help us to actually manage this as well. Because obviously trying to manage 500 students with individual levels, individual preferences is such a complex task that human beings or faculty by itself will never be able to do that. So we need the machines, we need AI, in that matter of fact, to actually support us and help us in delivering fantastic education.
Yep. And Dean Kang, do you think that Asia has a tradition, maybe not in your part of Asia, but in China particularly, of learning by rote? So they're very good at GMAT. I think China's typically for years has had the highest average GMAT scores, even though they're not native English speakers. But can educators flip to creating more creatives, more entrepreneurs, more leaders? And is that the right thing to do?
I definitely think so. I'm an eternal optimist, so I'm not worried about like some of our colleagues who think artificial intelligence will take away jobs. I think about new jobs that will be created, new opportunities that will be created. So I talked about our non-traditional faculty who are being hired from physicist background and so on and so forth. One of those faculty members said, this class participation thing that I'm not used to, because they are most used to the labs and so on and so forth, says, I think I can develop an algorithm to be able to help our faculty to more accurately assess the classroom activities. And also he was saying, we can look at the interactions, because sometimes I notice if so-and-so speaks, it always sparks more discussion as to somebody else who might have a very smart thing to say, but discussion stops there. So it's able to incorporate some of the human learnings into technology. And I think these are the kind of minds that we need to have. And perhaps, yes, I think the Asians are typically, I'm Korean by birth, by the way, are not known for creativity. We quite often are very well recognized being able to memorize things and recitate. But I think we can perhaps skip the generation, if you will. And then sometimes it's out of necessity. And there is an opportunity for us not to go make a step changes, but actually make a huge leap. And I think technology, artificial intelligence, deep learning, all of those things provide us with such an opportunity. So I look at the whole field with a much positive, optimistic view.
I think it's a very optimistic panel, and that's great. I'm encouraged by that. We are running out of time. I have one last question I'd like to ask, and very quick answers. So QS runs the Reimagine Education Global Awards for the most innovative pedagogies in learning and nurturing employability. We'd be interested to know, have you seen, or do you want to identify one education innovation or edtech company that you think is going to change the world?
Maybe I can say this. I would like to be able to say the Asian is the management, but we very much follow at this point. And this is not because Martin is sitting there or Santiago is sitting there, but I would say IE, for me, has always been a role model. They were independent, still is an independent business school, but they decided to move into undergraduate education and became IU University. I don't know if some of you heard about the WOW Room. It is one of the first of such technology being used in the classroom, and I think now we have quite a few other universities and business schools using it, but I think it's always been the case that using technology, looking at new business models, looking at the ways of educating people that are not fixated on the traditional framework.
Absolutely.
So I definitely like to recommend that you look at IE.
So, thank you. Martin, you have to think of something else to talk about now. You can't mention the WOW. So, Dean Veloso.
Okay.
Well, I certainly think that Imperial, my business school, is doing a lot of very innovative things. I mean, I mentioned a few of these elements, and we've been taking this quite seriously. I mean, we did as part of our strategic review, we did a project recently with IDEO, the design firm, precisely to help us think about how do we take the experience that we have, on the digital education that has been a very important investment of the school, and adapt that to what the students want of the future. A much more kind of hacker mentality student, do-it-yourself student that's looking for different things. And just to give you one very brief example of that, one of the ways that we're promoting that is to create a very significant learning environment around the entrepreneurial dimension. Imperial is creating a whole new campus in White City that's all devoted to entrepreneurship and innovation. It's going to be as big as the campus that exists now in South Ken, but all directed into this mindset. And the business school is going to be very much at the heart of that, with the idea that you can take this experience and create and put it in that environment. That's just one of the examples of how we're trying to really to do things differently in this experimental.
And very quick answers.
Yes, I've always been intrigued by the Quacquarelli School of Business at Boston University, with a master's program that they run in conjunction with a consulting company, in which the students actually are constituted in teams and work with consultants on real-life problems. I think that just looking at the way that it's run, it develops their creative abilities and the problem-solving abilities, because they're working on real-life problems. They're also learning from peers in terms of the engagement that they have, and that's a critical part of the people who are coming into business school today, that most of the learning, they learn from their peers and from one another there. So just working on real-life things there hones the number of the skills that we're trying to instill in students there. So I think that that's quite innovative.
Okay. Martin, you have time to think of something else.
So, Nunzio, after Jikyeong's comment, I should rather rest my case, I guess. No, seriously, but looking at this a little bit more strategically, I really hope that the next big innovations are coming actually from Africa. I really hope so, and I think there's a huge potential.
And there are lots of entries from Africa,
and
particularly mobile.
Fantastic potential, and I think having corporates such as Google move into Africa, I think, is the best sign that this is where the next revolution is coming from. So keep your eyes open for Africa, I would say.
Thank
Cool.
you.
All right. Well, I think we've run out of time, so I'd like to thank our panelists, Dean Boehm, Dean Okonedo, Dean Kang, Dean Veloso. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.